All right. Well, look, in the interest of time, it's 3 minutes past. We'll get going and make only a couple of introductions, but just to our speakers and thanks to them as well. So this event originated from a chat in one of our WhatsApp channels, a very active conversation a couple of weeks ago about around the security category, and we were very pleased to see that take off and grow arms and legs amongst some of you, our clients and your peers. And we said, look, well, why don't we bring a couple of experts along to a group of you all and speak independently. So I'll introduce Liam and Michael in a moment. But, you know, behind every cloud, we are very agnostic technology consultants. We know a little bit about a lot of subjects. We know a little bit more about some than others. But this is where we think we add our value, is to bring the best in the market at a particular time to a customer's requirement. So in this case, and I will disclose, Talion and Kroll were the very they were the 1 and 2 placed in an RFP that we assisted one of our clients running for the replacement of a couple of different security service contracts last year. And Craig and I were involved in that exercise quite heavily. It was a large FS organisation, 1,000 users globally, and a very complex set of requirements. And Talion and Kroll performed incredibly well. I won't disclose which, but one of them became the incumbent provider, won that process, but both performed, excellently well. So when there was a bunch of questions in our channel last week about endpoint protection, about Microsoft tooling, about Crowdstrike and others, and SIEMs, and lots of stuff that we don't know so much about, we thought we'll bring a couple of the guys from those organizations to talk to you all about them. And they're agnostic. They are MSSPs, so they're not from any one of the vendors that we might talk about today, but each of those organizations work with all of the technologies that we'll talk about today mostly. So Liam, can I offer you just because you were first on my screen when I looked at it, can I offer you the opportunity just to introduce yourself, your organization, just a couple of minutes, please. Guys, please do not fear. This is not a sales session today. That's not our approach, as I hope you will all know now. But it's education. It's us helping you on that journey of the questions that maybe keep you awake at night. And so there'll be no hard sell from anybody here today. I promise you. Liam, over to you. Couple of minutes.
Hi, my name's Liam Sousey. I'm the architecture director at Talion. In terms of experience, I guess I was a computational chemist back in the day, and we were using sort of analytics to solve problems that cyber really only has picked up in the last 10 years. And then I worked for EDS, HP, BA Systems, and Talion in lots of different guises. Secure comms, secure communications, cryptography, command systems, all sorts of military fun and giggles. Done a lot of government work, but probably the last 12 years been doing work around the building of SOCs in sandy places and elsewhere, and the commercial SOC for BA Systems. So that's sort of my experience. In terms of Talion, Talion is been going since, actually it was back pretty much around about lockdown. We came out of BA Systems. We were the BA Systems commercial SOC. The heritage of that SOC, it was founded before 2012, but did some of the monitoring for the 2012 games, monitored BA Systems itself. So obviously we had big target on the back, had to have some pretty industrial processes there. And as BA sought to basically focus back on government, the commercial SOC got sold off and brought Talion in to bear. Now, we had a lot of proprietary tooling, BA Systems related, as well as best of breed tools. And we used the opportunity when we came out of BA Systems to sort of diversify our portfolio, focus more on engineering and integration rather than favouring any one technology capability. So effectively, we've sort of gone down the path of providing standard MDR services, but also what we call hybrid SOC or hybrid MDR services, where we will utilize customers' SIEMs, or we can it's a brownfield or a greenfield situation, and basically put our SOAR around that and provide staff augmentation at any level, whether that's at the platform level, SIEM platform, content, staff org from an analyst perspective. So a sort of mix and match. So that's sort of where we come from, and background, etc.
Thank you, Liam. Nice to meet you. Michael Cowley, please, if you would do the same for Kroll.
Yeah, thanks very much. And Liam, I guess cyber has its type. I'm a chemist as well by education. So thanks everyone for the opportunity to meet you. I'm one of the AMDs at Kroll. I lead our global solution engineering team. Background wise, I kind of cut my teeth in the industry as a NOC SOC analyst way back when. And then over the years, I kind of moved into enterprise architecture, and then started leading design and consultancy teams, focused on security type services for clients. Now at Kroll, my primary aim is to use my 2 ears and 1 mouth and hopefully listen twice as much as I talk. But really, it's what I and my team aim to do is really understand what challenges are facing our clients, and then help build solutions to solve some of those challenges. In terms of who are Kroll, Kroll are the world's leading incident forensics investigators or incident response providers, mainly known for the work that we do post-breach, and basically being the guys that come in and really get clients out of sticky situations. Back in March 2021, though, Kroll actually acquired a UK-based MDR provider called Redscan, and really the one of the driving forces behind that acquisition was to have a platform, so a managed detection and response platform on which they could operationalize some of that proprietary threat intel data that we're getting from those incident response cases. And that's really how Kroll have entered the MDR market, and that's really the USP that we're looking to bring. So we see far more incidents than anyone else globally. With that comes a ton of threat intel. How can we get that threat intel into clients' hands in a meaningful way? And MDR services is how we're doing that. So I would love to talk about all of the warts and all for all the different vendors and give you guys some insights into what we might know from behind closed doors. So looking forward to sharing some stuff with you today.
Super, thanks, Michael. Okay, so the topics for today again originated from one of our WhatsApp channels a couple of weeks ago. So we've got 50 minutes to try and get across them. I don't imagine we're going to cover all of it, to be honest, but let's see where we go. So one of the first talking points and debates that struck up in that conversation was about endpoint protection tooling. One of our clients was posing the question, I'm with Crowdstrike at the moment. I'm considering whether that's right for us going into the next phase of where the business is going, and what's the experience across our group of other tools. There was some pros and cons discussed around Crowdstrike. Everyone's got their favorite, but to Liam and Michael, what do you see here? What favored products do you have? You're both companies are using a multitude of different technologies, and sometimes they're of the client's choice and sometimes they're of your recommendations. But and how does the client go about that evaluation of which is right for them? Liam, shall I ask you first?
Sure, yeah. So we, like I say, bolt solutions together, or we can roll those out, use existing ones. We've got some remediation services around specific EDRs, and those ones particularly are Crowdstrike, Defender, and SentinelOne. We're looking at Sophos EDR, bringing that into it. So there's a range that we've got a real intimate understanding of, and so we've got a rough idea of how they sort of interplay with each other. I suppose the other credential I would put there about sort of our experience is we do a lot of threat modeling for the customers, and we do a lot of evaluation across all the EDRs so that they can use the threat model to mix and match, compare EDRs, what TTPs they protect against, and it's quite tricky to get that out of the EDRs themselves. Obviously they don't want to give away exactly what their real coverage is, But as I'm sure you know, Mike at Kroll has got, you start to get a feel from the customer base of what the capability is just from passively receiving alerts, so you can then understand what the real MITRE mappings are in the background. And there's evaluations you can do, which we've done, which range from, you know, you could fully red team in an environment with, you know, testing all of the EDRs, which is very expensive, you know, sort of purple red team it and to actually probe it, or you can just accept what they say they do. And we tend to find ourselves somewhere in between, with obviously that passive input as well. And now, when we look across all of that, on the whole, essentially, I would say, as long as you're with CrowdStrike, Defender, Sentinel, the ones that we've sort of gone with, SentinelOne, they're all very capable EDRs. I wouldn't necessarily want to recommend one over the other, but definitely would want you to take one of them. I mean, it's really important to have the endpoint. I think there are, in terms of detection capability, they pretty much cover largely the same sort of areas. So again, I've got no preference across all of those. But one area I would say is interesting, particularly if you want to go to that next level, sort of beyond just the prevention and detection. If you're looking to orchestrate around that, you want to look for EDRs that have got that capability to work with, you know, integrate with and work with other orchestration tooling, or in some cases with some of our customers, we're able to pre-deploy IOCs into EDRs. So IOCs that we use for detection, to augment the in the case of CrowdStrike, they call them indicators, sorry, in Defender they call them indicators. In something like CrowdStrike, they're like indicators of compromise or indicators of attack, I think is the term they use. So we're looking for that next level where you can easily do that in a sort of systematic way. Defender's really good for that. You know, there's a nice little API that allows you to pre-deploy, like I say, or forward deploy, I should say, IOCs and mix and match that. Even though they're very accomplished, you know, the Microsoft TI capability is great. But obviously, organizations like Talion and Kroll might even come across 0 days, and so we can get stuff out there a little bit sooner than what, you know, commercial vendors can. So yeah, it's that level, and also the ability for it to reach in and work through orchestration capability, you know, API access, work that through so that you can actually take some actions, remediation actions, in relation to the consoles. So the EDRs I'd listed there, we do that with, so I know that that's good and they work with those. There are some that are more clunkier than others, and they're ones that, you know, we will only support to a certain level because we can't do that full wraparound capability. So I think as long as you've got those sort of, you know, that we feel like what would be the top right Gartner set, back in, you know, using old language, you're pretty much safe. But there is that piece that you've got to have a service wrap around it, whether you're providing it yourself or you're looking for a partner to do that, to top up in the areas where there might be slight differences between the two.
And yeah, I'd agree with a lot of what Liam has said. I mean, I guess to boil it down into the simplest terms, CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, Defender, I think those are definitely the leading three. If you're looking to evaluate the EDR tools for your environment, those would be the three best to start off with. I think which ones are right for you is not always a straightforward answer. I think you need to do things like assess the assets in your environment that you're looking to protect. You know, what OSs do you have? What are your kernel versions? And the answers to that will basically tell you which is the most likely supported tool in your environment. So rule of thumb, if it's a third-party thing like CrowdStrike or SentinelOne, you're actually going to get much better support for older Windows OSs than you are going to get with Defender. reason being Microsoft are basically incentivized to get you on the latest and greatest OS, because then they can start selling you other Microsoft features. So if it's anything kind of 2012 R2 and before, you actually want to go with Crowdstrike or SentinelOne. If it's anything 2016 and later, you're probably okay on any of those three. Windows and Linux are also better supported generally on SentinelOne and Crowdstrike than Defender, and actually a lot of the response features in Defender aren't available on those systems. So yeah, I mean, that's some rule of thumbs. In terms of the high level, so Crowdstrike from our experience is great when it comes to out of the box detections. They probably actually have the best out of the box detections. So if you're not looking to ingest any additional threat feeds like Liam mentioned, or you're not looking to put any custom rules on top, then out of the box, you're probably going to get the best results with Crowdstrike. But it is worth mentioning, if you look at some of the industry evaluation standards like MITRE Ingenuity, Crowdstrike performed very well, but that's with every single feature and every single module purchased and onboarded. So you just got to be wary about looking at some of the industry stats like that, you know. Whereas if you compare, say, to SentinelOne, you actually get a far richer feature set out of the box on the SentinelOne Complete, which is basically their basic offer, than you do with Crowdstrike Falcon on its own. Crowdstrike, just going back to them, they play very well with other vendors and they're building some strong partnerships, which is really nice to see. Splunk, they've got good integrations with other platforms like NDR platforms like Corelight, they're building out strong partnerships with. So they do very well in that kind of other vendor ecosystem. One thing to be aware of with Crowdstrike is sometimes there can be hidden costs. So as an example, the way in which you can apply rules in Crowdstrike isn't actually as good as with Defender and SentinelOne, and actually the level of rules you can write in the Crowdstrike Falcon platform are somewhat limited, which means what we see a number of clients actually looking to do, if they want to write complex rules, they then have to export data into, say, a Splunk SIEM, and then you've almost got a hidden cost of the Falcon replicator to export the data and then your Splunk licenses to ingest the data. So that's something to be aware of. But as I mentioned, they've got good support across other OSs. The other thing to mention on Crowdstrike, they're doing a bit of a land grab at the moment. In the long term, that's probably a good thing. They're acquiring lots of other businesses and they're looking to bring in new features. So in 2 to 3 years, they could have very significant offerings, but in the short term, that might confuse their market and their messaging a little bit. Any questions on Crowdstrike, by the way, before I go on to SentinelOne and Defender? Yes, David.
David.
So it was a bit early because you're going to go on to Defender, but I was just about there's quite a few firms who've got Microsoft E5 licenses, so basically they've been given Defender free.
Exactly.
And it's a horrible discussion to have with your CFO when you say, well, we've got this for free, why should we be paying for a CrowdStrike or another tool? And basically Microsoft are sort of buying the market up, and it's very difficult to argue against free.
It's genius, isn't it? And I mean, my experience is if you don't include Microsoft in your RFP process or in your evaluations when you're looking at the market, then you're doing something wrong. And you almost have to justify the position of not including a vendor rather than choosing to include a vendor, which is bonkers, right? Yeah, I mean, my first notes I always say around Defender is they are unavoidable part of the conversation because of E5 licensing. And, so much of the other security set in E5 you want in your organization that it forces your hand to consider E5. Where we actually see organizations do really well, and this is why I said it's not always a simple decision when it comes to what is the right tool. We see a lot of organizations be successful in adopting different tools. And what I mean by that is where E5 is there and it's available for the users, put Defender for Endpoint on the user's machines, right? Because it is a free license and you'd be bonkers to not leverage it. But where you might otherwise have to buy additional licensing, so, Defender for Servers or Defender for Endpoint for Servers or Defender for Cloud, and that doesn't fall part of your E5 licensing, then actually we see other organizations actually then go and buy Crowdstrike or SentinelOne, who are ironically actually a bit cheaper to license than Microsoft for those assets. And then it actually becomes about supporting a hybrid EDR environment where you have Defender for Endpoint on some tools and S1 on other assets, right? So Defender, I mean, I can go on to Defender then. So it is a very good EPP product. So when it comes to prevention and detection within systems, it's very good. And it's good for small scale IR response. So basically, if it's included as part of an MDR service where you're proactively monitoring ahead of time, and then you can kind of quash bad as it happens, it's a good tool. And, you know, I agree with everything Liam said there. Where it's not the right tool from our experience is for large scale IR cases. So where you're trying to gather forensics from, you know, hundreds or thousands of endpoints concurrently, that's actually where the tool shows its kind of its EPP heritage as opposed to its IR EDR heritage, where, you know, historically Crowdstrike, SentinelOne, Carbon Black even, you know, actually perform much better. So there are some limitations that a lot of people don't know. So in Defender for Endpoint, there is like a limit of 25 concurrent live response commands. There's things like 10-minute maximum timeouts on script executions. And there is you can't run or execute arbitrary code or commands on the endpoint during live response cases, which makes the life of a forensics investigator much harder in trying to gather up and scoop up lots of data from lots of different machines at once. So if you're trying to investigate hundreds of endpoints, let's say, you're looking at it taking you now half a day or a day to get back all the info you might want for your investigation, as opposed to, you know, 15 minutes on one of the other platforms. That's something to be aware of. That's also something the CFO probably doesn't care about, because, you know, it's very hard to justify you need this tool for forensics in case you have a large scale breach. Where I think Defender is brilliant is actually part of the broader XDR play. So it might not be the best EDR tool for the reasons I just mentioned, but in terms of where does it fit in an ecosystem, and in the Microsoft XDR ecosystem, to be quite frank, it fits fantastically. And actually the integration you get between the other Defender products is very, very good. So I think that's where Microsoft are excelling.
David, thank you for that question. It speaks to a later topic that we were going to come into around the Microsoft estate. But Michael, can I just take you back to a point you made earlier about securing different flavors of infrastructure? So two of our clients had asked the question, or they were having problems with, is Crowdstrike as good across my Red Hat Enterprise Linux estate as it is across my Oracle Cloud infrastructure, as it is across Microsoft? So you, Michael, let's ask you first. But, you know, is there a place for a single choice of tooling, or, like you said, are we best with Microsoft in the endpoint in that part of the estate and SentinelOne at the server level somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say look at what you want to do. If you have an ability to do what I call, and actually Gartner calls it this, but if you have an ability to do backend XDR, which in simple terms just basically means if you have an ability to do security case management where it doesn't matter where the alert is coming from, which tool it's coming from, if you have an ability to pull it into a single place where you can then launch an investigation from, then I think you should definitely be open to considering different tools to get the best coverage and the best response capabilities for your environment. If I had to give super high level recommendations without knowing anything else about your infrastructures, I would say if it's a container type environment, S1 for K8 is fantastic, super easy to deploy, gives great coverage. If it's Linux or Mac OS, then S1 and Crowdstrike are very, very good. S1 can support more of the weird and wonderful flavors. Crowdstrike, though, is pretty easy to adopt and deploy. So I think those two are on par, and actually you probably need to get into the low-level support documentation to tell you what's best. Okay. And then, yeah, for Windows, just DFE where you can, and then other bits to cover the rest.
Liam, anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I think that's excellent. Description of the pros and cons. I think the bit that, and I think Mike touched on it a couple of times, is where you've got that mixed fleet scenario, and it's bringing that in. If you've got the capability to do that, that's fine. I think the issue is the additional training burden of having that mixed fleet, and that's the concern I would have with that. And it's making sure that either you're prepared to support the skills base of that, or find a partner that can do it for you. Either way, to get that level of capability in, there is always a price. And so trying to weigh that up within the organization. I mean, I know customers that have just gone exactly, one of the recommendations Michael was given there was, that have just gone full Microsoft stack. And they've just completely embraced it and not worried too much about that. But again, they haven't got a massive Linux fleet, if at all, actually. So that suits them nicely. But there are some customers I know that just haven't got the will, funds, ability to want to keep the skills up, where they've considered, mixing their EPPs. You started to stray possibly, and probably this is intentionally, Paul, onto that next security tool choices question. So do you want to broaden it out beyond EPP and EDRs at this stage, or is that where you was going with that?
I'll actually take us to the question a little bit more in the Microsoft space, actually, if we can. So what some of the comments would be about, like your case you just gave the example of, putting ourselves all in the Microsoft security estate, potentially gives us more visibility, more data for Microsoft to model and look at, and they're seeing more of our estate to judge. But also, are you putting too many eggs in one basket by exposing all of the attack surface to them? Is that a good thing or not such a good thing? Liam?
I think, again, it's sort of horses for courses, I would say. I've got painful experience of observing customers going down that path when we think maybe they shouldn't. I think that what you do get, and Michael alluded to it earlier, is a really tight integration. That stack is incredibly tightly integrated, but and that's at either what I would call, if you like, the network operations, sort of like NOC level and SOC level. So there is all the capability there to really tighten your operation. The big issue, and I've seen customers come a cropper with this, is the level of configuration required to really realize that value. So although Microsoft is stealing the market, as Michael was saying, and throwing this stuff at you in E5 license, the real cost is bringing the expertise in, obviously in-house, and you're having to maintain those suitably qualified engineers internally, or bringing that PS capability in to actually manage that around you and say, right, have we configured this right? Have we enabled all of the sub products that sit in the Defender stack, whether it's MCAS, Defender for Cloud, Defender for Identity? Is it properly configured? Is Purview configured correctly? What is my policies? To actually leverage all of these elements, it's quite hard to really fully expand into the envelope of those licenses that have been slung at you. And the danger then, what is the danger of that? The danger of that is that you can end up almost sleepwalking into saying, right, we're going to be covered, and not actually ever getting there. Whereas when you focus on bringing a couple of other point solutions in around it, and you put your focus into those, and you're saying, right, I'm closing off this particular attack vector, or I'm going to detect around it, you can invest time there, and it's very clear what you're doing, and you might use the Microsoft stack for something else. It's a bit more easy to, if you like, eat the elephant. So that's my fundamental concern of people going full or Microsoft is fundamentally the configuration, and are they really safe? And so that's, I think, something that needs to be considered.
Yeah, I think it's funny, isn't it? E5 can sometimes be, hate to use this term, but I think it's apt. It's kind of all the gear but no idea. And exactly like Liam says, just because you've got the licenses to do the thing, actually doing the thing itself is a hard task, right? Microsoft as a vendor, I think, are very technically good. It's very apparent that the investment that they've thrown into security over the last 5 years has really had an impact. And when it comes to launching new features and features of interest, they're exceptional. And they're probably one of the biggest growth vendors out there at the moment. So that you can't deny the technical excellence in a lot of their products. I will say though, they do almost show their age in some of their naivety at the same time. Recall is a brilliant example of how they've been naive in entering the market. So if you're not familiar with Recall, by the way, it's a new feature recently announced by Microsoft that effectively does screen logging or key logging in screen captures of all systems, right? And I think that is just a great example of how they've launched a feature as part of a wider business initiative without thinking how this is going to put InfoSec's backs up. I certainly know from our investigations, the first thing threat actors do when they compromise an endpoint is get a keylogger in there, get screen capture in there, and effectively you've given them the first tools that they would want to have on the systems already. So yeah, that's a little bit naive. I think Microsoft are also naive with their approach, which from my experience and helping clients evaluate their spend in Microsoft and in Sentinel specifically, Microsoft's approach is get Defender, get the tools, stick it all in Azure Log Analytics, and then layer Sentinel over the top of it. Happy days, which is great for Microsoft, but it's not that great for clients. So, and that's effectively just pushing more logging and more spend into the Microsoft ecosystem. So
the SIEM cost can escalate rapidly, and it's an unknown cost that creeps up on people.
Yeah, and there's a lot of bloat in it. So I think that's slight naivety on Microsoft's perspective. They're thinking probably what's a nice feature to have as opposed to what's actually going to help our clients long term maintain, viable operational costs across their systems. So yeah, to Liam's point, you need to have a bit of consideration when it comes to implementing Microsoft, and you need to make sure that you're understanding what you're doing really.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to move us on to a very related, but the next topic. So, Michael, you mentioned Microsoft's new Edge features, but AI and machine learning generally. So, is this one could take us to the top of the hour, I think. So we better be careful here. Is this just Emperor's new clothes? What is AI in security? What's Copilot doing in the Microsoft estate? Do we really want to ask our SIEM a question through NLP, or is it just a gimmick? Liam, what's your feelings on this AI space?
Well, I'll talk about Copilot and then I'll broaden it out. I'll try and be really quick. So we have a lot of customers who have the Microsoft stack. We also utilize a SOAR that has got inverted commas AI elements within it that does a similar thing can do a similar thing to Copilot. Frankly, when we're using it, if you was talking to sort of like our principal analyst around it, their sort of comment on Copilot and the like is, this might be something useful to help maybe, in a completely brand new analyst that's straight out of university to have a look at it. But very quickly, within, a few days, to be effective, they'd be beyond that. So where I'd say Copilot is at the moment, it's very cool, it's very whizzy, but it doesn't allow you to really deeply investigate and take it as far as you would need to in an actual breach situation, or even in elements of triage. So I think it will give you a leg up, but it's almost, again, it's that situation that I think Michael talked about where you've got all the gear, but actually you could end up feeling safer than you really are. So I think when it comes to sort of intermediate to highly skilled analysts, it's not adding that much value. I think the other interesting thing is that within it asks, asks you if you think this was the right response that was given. So effectively, and quite maybe cleverly, they're using the more people that use it, they'll get training. You know, they'll be able to train the models. And again, I'd be interested in the ethics or understanding, you know, how that data is maintained. You know, again, we all know about the leakage of data in generative AI capability that you could get. So there are considerations there, but at this stage, I would say that you would outgrow it as it is at the moment relatively quickly with, you know, a decent couple of analysts. I think what's interesting is to see if they really continue to invest in it and see what it's like, you know, in a few years down the line. And then more broadly, AI in general, I'll be really brief on this. Effectively, I've aside from generative AI, which is, you know, a very small slither of it, you know, AI really in terms of obviously, you know, AGI, you know, sort of artificial general intelligence obviously doesn't exist yet. The way it's marketed is as though all of these AI features are, at best, they might be unsupervised machine learning. So I from my perspective, I would say AI doesn't exist in these platforms. You inherit and leverage a lot of this brilliant correlating and capability essentially, and you can pull that together, but it still needs Mark 1 eyeball at the moment, I say, to really bring it all together. And I think you know, that is ultimately, it's still requiring that human on the end of it to, at the moment, to interpret all of these different feeds. And there are definitely things that will help. In Copilot, as an example, there's the ability to use natural language, obviously, to set up the KQL query. I don't know the real accuracy of that, but I can see how that could be useful. But again, very quickly, once you understand the form of the language, you'll surpass that. So it feels a little bit too gimmicky at the moment. So yeah, I'd probably leave it there, and I don't know, give Michael some time to give his view.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head on a lot of the elements there, Liam, especially with the how was this recommendation, thumbs up, thumbs down. Yes, I think actually early adopters are training the models, and secondly, from my own personal experience, I actually feel like I am both training the model, but also by clicking either thumbs up or thumbs down, I'm absolving Microsoft of any bad recommendations that Copilot's given me, right? So you're kind of, and you know, look, we've trialed and been trialing and are still trialing Copilot internally across the Copilot for Defender suite, as well as across the, you know, the Office productivity suites. And much of what I'm feeling personally about Copilot is it's not a finished product, right? We are still basically being platform and application testers for Microsoft, is the long and short of it. Where does AI fit, or where do these large language models, because that's what they are, fit with all of the security vendors? I think everyone's got their flavor, is the first thing I'll say. So SentinelOne have Purple AI, Defender has Copilot, obviously, Crowdstrike has Charlotte. I'm sure part of the impetus for Palo Alto to acquire QRadar is maybe they can get Watson, you know, in the back end. It'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. So I think the long and short of it, though, is large language models and, you know, this chat GPT gen of AI being baked into security tools is a thing that will happen, and it's a thing that will stay. So I think that's definitely a direction of travel. Where do I think it's going to help? Liam made a point earlier actually about having multiple different tools and there being an operational overhead or an operational burden that puts on security teams to get familiar with different tools, which was 100% accurate. I think that's actually where we'll see AI or these LLM platforms being useful. What they will allow an analyst to do is to basically interact and access data using natural language, which will indirectly then reduce the burden to understand specific language like, you know, Splunk query language, Custo query language, you know, from different tools, right? You'll be able to ask the platform in a natural language, hey, can you help me find information on X, Y, and Z, without actually having to know the underpinning language that specific product uses. So where will AI help? I think accessing data, making it easier for SOC analysts who have multiple different tools to get their hands on that data without having to learn the native language. And then I think it will help when it comes to analyzing large data sets and getting out trend information from large data sets without having to, sift through so many charts and stuff. Where do I think AI or the chat around it is hindering things at the moment? I think there's a lot of marketing and silver bullet phenomena chat going on at the moment, which is giving people the wrong impression of what a large language model is and does. And it's actually causing a lot of buyer confusion, which is not helpful. I've spoken to a lot of people who are saying, yeah, we're going to get rid of L1s and L2s, from the stack. Our L1, L2 stack is going to be AI powered. We're only going to have L3s and L4s. I think that's a terrible idea right now. And I think there's a real danger about effectively giving that first line of triage away to a system that's automated. Because if you think about it, the stuff that you actually respond to, your first line are almost the most important line, right? Because they're the ones who are identifying the things that really are worth your time to investigate. So you need to be very careful about normalizing the message there through use of things like AI. And then, the way I always view these kind of Copilot programs or other AI platforms is they're almost like executive assistants. And what they're very good at doing at the moment is summarizing large data sets and giving you the bullet points, but they're not going to do the inference or the investigation. So as Liam was alluded to, my best use for Copilot at the moment is when someone sends me a really wafty email and I just click the summarize for me button and it puts it into 5 bullets and I've saved half an hour of my life. And I'd say that's the same thing when it comes to investigating security stuff, right? With Copilot for Defender, it will summarize the information you're seeing, but it won't actually help you know how to respond or what the best response is. And then the other bit that's getting a lot of marketing attention at the moment is this whole AI versus AI. And, I think we're being given a picture of, it's Skynet days, you've got computer systems fighting computer systems. And frankly, that is just not the case, right? That is not what Kroll are seeing when we're responding to incidents. We aren't seeing large AI bots going up against each other, right? Where we're seeing LLMs actually be leveraged well by adversaries is in crafting exceptionally convincing phishing campaigns. You can now go and write a phishing email in pretty much any language you want, and it will look super convincing, right? Because it's got huge data sets of what nice emails look like, and it's basically taking the inference from there. AI is also being leveraged to generate fake emails. So, domain redirect attacks are on the rise because actually you can do very, very convincing, here's your office login page lookalikes, and it's being used to great effect there. But what AI isn't being used to do is to go and analyze code and find vulnerabilities or flaws in code. And the reason that's, my view on why we're not actually seeing that as part of IRs is because LLMs work on having very, very large data sets. And actually, when you've just got a piece of code to review, that's not part of a large data set. So the inferences it can make are very, very limited and are actually far more in the defender's favor at the moment, which is a really great thing to see. So yeah, AI versus AI, I'd say don't buy that nonsense, but do be cautious about domain impersonation and phishing emails, because those are definitely going to go on the rise because of this stuff.
Thank you, Michael. We have 2 topic areas left. I'm going to skip one and move to the final one in case we run out of time, guys, because we're coming up to the top of the hour. SIEM technology. Why are they? We haven't spoken much about them today. Why is it important? Why is it? How does it factor in your choice, maybe of EDR or EPP? Is this a should this be a factor in the decision around the rest of your tooling? If you've chosen one before the other, does some play nicer with others, for instance? Liam, shall I put that to you first?
Yeah, sure. So we've got, I'm sure Kroll do well, but from observing as well. But we utilize a lot of SIEMs. We come across them and we swap out, the brownfield SIEM that's in there. Certainly heavily support the likes of ArcSight, Devo, Splunk, So again, just sort of giving the qualifications really of what I'm about to say. I think it's a bit like the EPP scenario in the sense that a SIEM will do a job, and if you're using a SIEM that's in that top right area, you're going to get the ability, the capability to be able to create detections. I think as long as you're in that play, that sort of wheelhouse, the scenario, the issue then becomes about the skills around it to support it, and to get the most out of the SIEM, you do need to have those skill sets. I liken the choices between SIEMs is that if you imagine a bar chart where the y-axis is capability, or if you like coverage or the ability that you're getting out of it, and then right along the x-axis is all the different features. The SIEMs vary across that, right? So one fingerprint for one SIEM is going to be slightly different to another. One's going to be stronger in the number of parsers it's got. One might be stronger in terms of the back end capability, search capability, and what it is the job of security teams or SOCs or MSSPs is to add on the process and people element on top of that, if you like, that capability bar chart to top it up in the various areas. So I think again, you've got some choices around SIEMs, but ultimately what you've got to be careful of is making sure that you look at your requirements, look at where you've got skills. If you've got good engineering skills and you're not worried about that they can build parsers using the tooling that's there, it might be that you can focus more on SIEMs that are stronger or more on the back end side. If you've got the ability you've got people that have, and you're keen to develop your own content, you want to focus on those SIEMs that have got that capability, because you can leverage that more easily. So it's a bit of a mix, and I think what's important is making sure that you go into this with your eyes open and you're thinking about, okay, right, what skills do I need? What skill mix do I need to support myself in using this particular SIEM? Because you can have a top SIEM, like I say, whether it's Splunk in place, but if you've not got the skill set to actually use the envelope of its capability, then you may as well be using a third-rate capability. So it is all about the setting up of ensuring that you're setting up the platform element side of it. Content is really key, because most of the default content that comes out of the SIEMs has a huge amount of false positives, because they can't know how to tune it, and they want to be able to get a lot of detections, and all about that tuning is important. And then obviously you've got the if you like, the case capabilities, security cases around it, and that's where you might want to either use SOCs that are inherent in the SIEM, SOARs inherent in the SIEM to try and pull this together and orchestrate around it, or you might find, oh, actually, I need to bring another capability in over the top of this to be able to organize all of this and be able to act upon the information that's come out of the SIEM. And so again, you're creating more engineering problems for yourself and cost. So I think always what you've got to end up doing is be prepared to go in and say, I'm going to have to invest in tuning any default content that comes out of a SIEM. I've never seen a SIEM deploy and not cause a huge amount of false positives there. So definitely, you need to be thinking about who you're going to get into to tune and hone your SIEM.
Michael, can I move to you just for a short answer on that one, while we then maybe give a couple of minutes to questions at the end?
Yeah, it's not a short one, but yeah, I'll be as brief as I can. No, I'm joking. I mean, look, I think Liam touched on a load of really good points there. I'll take a slightly different tact, and I'll say actually the first question you should probably ask is, what are the use cases that you're looking to drive. And I appreciate, I mean, most of the people on the call, I'm assuming, are security focused, but actually we see organizations adopt SIEMs not just for infosec purposes, but also for other kind of broader business purposes. Some of the SIEM platforms like Splunk actually first made their mark as kind of operational platform monitoring tools and tools that can help with things like website performance and stuff. And then they've moved into the SecOps space. Other platforms, let's say Logarithm, might have made their name as security tools, right? So I'd say, what is the purpose for a SIEM in your organization? That will probably determine what is a good platform. And are other teams going to be using it, or is it purely going to be an infosec tool? If it's purely an infosec tool, you've probably got a bit more flexibility around what you choose. If other teams are going to be using it, then you probably need to be a bit more open-minded to other tools. And then I'd say kind of the SIEMs that you've shortlisted, which ones give you the architectural options that make sense for you? When we talk to clients about relevant data to be ingesting, we normally talk about it in 3 distinct buckets. What is good log data for driving detections as part of an MDR practice? What is good log data to have as post-breach forensics? So, hey, this is stuff we want to ingest, we want to keep in case anything ever happens in the future, but we don't want to put it into a SIEM spend. Maybe we'll just put it into a log storage spend. So what's good detection data, what's good forensics data, and then lastly, what is just data we have to have from a compliance perspective, right, to help us meet various auditing requirements. So I'd say consider your data in that way. Obviously, then think about what are the volumes associated to each of those data types. And then when you're looking at and evaluating SIEM platforms, think about which of those platforms is going to give you a flexible architecture to then help you meet those considerations, right? That was a very high level one. We can talk
Michael,
about it.
thanks for such a quick follow up there. With 5 minutes left, guys, can I just ask, has anyone got any questions they'd like to put to the guys here before maybe we'll have time to cover the subject we didn't get onto? Anyone speak or chat? No? Okay. All right. Let's do you either one of you want to expand any more on the SIEM topic, or should we just go to the final topic about securing the cloud? Okay, let's do that then. So when we used to secure stuff in our data centers, our apps sitting on LAMP infrastructures and firewalls that we configured ourselves, it was, we've all probably old enough and grey enough to have done this a few times. Is this stuff now sitting in the cloud a whole new skill that a bit like DevOps is a shift left kind of change that we've got to retrain our people? How are teams coping with it? And what's the differences? Liam, can I put that to you first?
Yeah, sure. Again, this is a massive subject. If I was trying to really get to the nub of it, I think there is a skill shortage in general. I think that it can be incredibly complex, and it's really important that you understand where your true boundaries are, and also whether what your third party, it might be cloud suppliers, what their boundaries are as well, and the interaction between the two. And we've seen some examples of that really recently, of whose responsibility is it the third party cloud provider. So getting your head around that is incredibly difficult, and it needs quite if you like experienced resource. In what I've seen, our customers, we've had situations where it isn't so much of a clear vulnerability that we've seen in the cloud caused by a lack of that knowledge. It might be just a misconfiguration, the classic one, which I'm sure Michael could talk for ages on, and that he's seen, in the environment, with different attacks, etc. Is like S3 bucket misconfigurations. That's a classic one where you don't realise that actually that's open, and because of the not having the tooling in place to really cascade down through the cloud and understand the securing there. I think there are tools coming on the market. I'll just quickly move on and say there's tools on the market to try and help and assist in that area, because I think just leaving it to using CloudTrail or GuardDuty to monitor you, again, it needs quite a lot of intelligence, if you like, around that to check that. And we've got other customers who are starting to utilize tooling such as Wiz, I think is a good example of one, where they're leveraging that essentially in front of these capabilities, which it itself is using some of that underlying capability, but then if you like, trying to take the heavy lifting out in terms of detection. So I think in short, it needs an experienced eye. It needs you to understand your boundaries, not just yours but your suppliers, and I think there is a market there, and it's starting to come about to really help organizations pin down the nebulous nature of the cloud.
Michael, can I offer the last minute of our webinar?
Do it in 30 seconds. So yeah, Liam again is spot on. When cloud first was a thing, the cloud responsibility matrix, did the rounds, and I think that is certainly true. It's all about understanding kind of where do the lines of responsibility stop between you and the providers. But before all of that, I think if I can give anyone any advice, it's understanding what it is that you mean by cloud. You can speak to someone and they'll say, when I say cloud, I mean I'm outsourcing my infrastructure to someone else's data center. You can speak to another person in the same organization and they'll tell you about how they're trying to move all their apps to be built in cloud native microservices, right? So really, what are we talking about when we're talking about cloud is the first thing to understand, and then that will tell you which tools you need. From an incident response perspective, I think it's also super important to understand where incident response responsibilities vary between cloud assets and traditional on-prem assets, where you can just typically pick up the phone, speak to one of the IT guys and get them to disconnect a thing. How do you do that same workflow in a cloud workflow, right? Do you need API calls instead of phone calls? It's probably a good question to ask. And if you don't have cloud-specific incident readiness plans in place for if you would suffer a cloud breach, then I would certainly encourage you to put some thought into those and getting those prepped.
Brilliant. Michael, Liam, thank you ever so much. To our participants, round of applause to Kroll and Talion. Thank you for your expert feedback and comment. And to you, our audience, thank you ever so much for giving up an hour. I hope it was useful. We'll share the recording afterwards. Any questions, fire away. We'll field them to our partners and come back to you with any responses. Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks for your time. Cheers.
Thank you.